Carl Edwards is now ruling out a potential return to NASCAR, and Rick Kendrick calls out Ross Chastain, and Justin Marks finally responds. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to the video. We got to NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to go ahead and start talking about Michael McDowell, as it was announced yesterday afternoon that Michael McDowell is going to be running a Mark Martin throwback this weekend at North Wilkesboro. This is a throwback to Mark Martin's 1990 Folger scheme. Front row absolutely nailed this. So this looks absolutely phenomenal, absolutely incredible. There's some pretty awesome looking throwbacks of the weekend, but I think this is definitely the one that takes the cake outside of the number 29 throwback that Kevin Hart was running. I think that one's the best, but this one looks absolutely incredible, and they did a fantastic job on this, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Hardy. As it was announced on Monday morning that Hardy is going to perform a Saturday night concert at Talladega this upcoming fall. Hardy is currently one of the biggest country music singers and one of the biggest artists in the industry currently at the moment right now. Has been making smash hit after smash hit and just released a pretty cool and really awesome album not too long ago. Really awesome to see Hardy is going to be performing live. People say his concerts are always phenomenal, so we're really excited to see that Hardy will be performing a concert on Saturday night at Talladega. Really exciting stuff. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Wayne Taylor Racing with Andretti Autosport. As it was announced yesterday morning that Wayne Taylor Racing with Andretti Autosport will field 2 GTP cars in 2024. Obviously, Felipe Albuquerque and Ricky Taylor are going to drive the 10 car for the whole season, and the second car will have more drivers that will be announced in the foreseeable future. I believe this will be the first time that Wayne Taylor Racing has ever had 2 cars, and a lot of that is due to the backing of Andretti Autosport. Obviously, Andretti has had a partnership with Wayne Taylor Racing now since the beginning of the 2023 season, so I think it's really awesome and really cool to see that they're going to be expanding to 2 cars. Because normally they've only had 1 car they've run all year. So I think it's really cool to see they're expanding. And it's now more cars for the GTP field, meaning that especially for the Rolex 24, you're going to have more cars out there on the track competing in the GTP class. I think that's going to be really exciting, especially with the potential of other teams that could expand in IMSA. I think this is really exciting stuff. And glad to see that Wayne Taylor Racing is going to be expanding from 1 to 2 cars in 2024. Really exciting stuff. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. As it was just announced about 30-40 minutes ago at the time of recording this, that the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix has been canceled due to flooding in the Emilia-Romagna area. As much as I'm disappointed in the decision that they have made, it is the right call. Safety is the number one most priority, and while you do want to put on a race in F1, in racing there, considering I think this is the only time they're going to be racing in the Imola area, it is absolutely the right decision and right call, and I think that they absolutely got the call right, which is something over the last years that's been kind of uncommon for the FIA to make really good decisions. Especially if how much flooding's been around the area, it would have taken way too long to get the track prepared, and there have been a lot of issues getting the event prepared. So I think this is the right decision, even though it sucks that there's not going to be an F1 race this weekend. We just got one more week till the Monaco Grand Prix, and it gets everyone a little bit more time to prepare for the Monaco Grand Prix. Big question is going to be, will this event be made up? Honestly, I'm not sure if this event will ever be made up. The only time I could see it being made up is maybe during the summer break in a couple months. Other than that, I don't see there being really the chance or possibility for that to happen. So yeah, disappointing news, but honestly the right call and right decision that they have made, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about the GMR Grand Prix TV ratings. As Adam Stern put out a tweet in regards to the ratings for the GMR Grand Prix in Indianapolis, and he says, according to him, NBC got a 0.46 rating and 715,000 viewers for Saturday's IMS race, down from a 0.6 rating and 998,000 viewers in 2022. That is a drop of almost 25% in the ratings category, and that is almost a drop of 300,000 viewers in the viewership category. That is absolutely not really good. Obviously, you had the Xfinity Series race going on at the same time as the IndyCar race, but a lot of people, and I saw even got comments on this on my post on Twitter, that people were saying that they didn't even know that there was an IndyCar race on until Chip Ganassi put out a tweet saying, "I like winners." And that has been a big problem with IndyCar, especially recently. They do not promote their series, and they've had ratings drops pretty much all across the board in 2023. A lot of people thought that CW show, the 100 Days of Indy, was really going to help. And while I think that's helped IndyCar a little bit, it's not a good thing to see a huge drop like this. And you don't want to see ratings drops across the board like this because it hurts the series long term and it puts the series in a bad position, especially for sponsors. So it's really disappointing news to see that TV ratings are down. They're going to have to get the situation taken care of, and they got to get the situation resolved. Otherwise, IndyCar is going to have a big, disappointing future going forward. Hopefully, they'd like to go ahead and get the situation taken care of in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chris Hacker. As it was announced on Monday afternoon that Chris Hacker is going to drive the 30 for On Point Motorsports this weekend in North Wilkesboro. I believe this would be Chris Hacker's second or third start of the 2023 season. He has driven the 30 truck so far in 2023. Honestly, he's had some decent runs in the 30 truck in the past, but not the most fantastic runs. That being said, I think Chris Hacker does have a chance and an opportunity to maybe compete up front. He's got a lot of short track racing experience, and he's had some decent runs in the past. So I'm wishing the best of luck to Chris Hacker. Hope he can do a really good job with On Point Motorsports. I think they've got to make it into the show. I don't think they have enough owners points to make it in currently at the moment. So hopefully Chris Hacker can make the show this weekend at North Wilkesboro. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Josh Williams. As it was announced on Monday afternoon that Josh Williams is going to drive the 22 for AM Racing this weekend at North Wilkesboro. This, I believe, will be the first time that Josh Williams has competed in the Truck Series in a very, very long time. Obviously, Josh Williams basically made a name for himself earlier this year with the Atlanta stunt, basically driving the 92 for DGM Racing. This is very interesting because DGM, of course, AM Racing is a Ford team, and Josh Williams drives for a Chevy team in the Xfinity Series. But this isn't a bad shot or opportunity, and I think especially how good of a short track racer Josh Williams has proven himself to be. I think Josh Williams can honestly do very, very good this weekend. So I'm really looking forward to it. Hope he can do a really, really good job in that number 22 truck, and looking forward to seeing him driving in the NASCAR Truck Series race at North Wilkesboro this weekend. It's a legendary event, and looking forward to seeing him out there running in the truck race. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Ross Chastain. Now, Ross Chastain is going to be running his 6th lower tier series race in 2023. And normally, drivers only limited to running 5 lower tier races and not just all together. Well, basically, Ross Chastain, because he's only been running in full-time in 2021-2022, according to Joseph Sprigley, he does not have any sort of limitations running races, so he doesn't have any sort of limitations. But you can, of course, run the Dash Cash race, the playoff races, or the Triple Truck Challenge races. But, of course, Ross Chastain is able to run every other race. That is very surprising, because I thought it was a rule that if you were declared for the Cup Series points, that you basically were limited to only running 5 races. I guess you had to be only in the first 3 years. If you base in the first 3 years, you're allowed to run as many races as you want, which is very surprising and interesting because, like I said, I thought there was a rule that basically changed in 2022. I guess that rule is still around. I guess those limitations are not a thing for drivers that don't have a lot of experience, which is interesting, though, because if you look at Ross Chastain, he ran a lot of races from 2017 to 2020 before he officially became full-time in the NASCAR Cup Series. But I think it's very interesting to see. Very interesting to know. And again, I'm a little surprised by this. I would have definitely thought he would have had some restrictions, but I do understand, I guess, because he's only been full-time for 2 years. This is the 3rd year. After this year, I'd imagine that he will basically have those restrictions put on him. I'm not entirely shocked or surprised, but again, I'm also a little bit surprised in some token as well. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Robert Wickens. Now, Robert Wickens has been asked a lot of questions about if he's ever going to run the Indy 500 or come back to IndyCar. Well, Robert Wickens actually kind of confirmed yesterday, I believe in a motorsports.com article or Autosport article, that he wants to run the Indianapolis 500. He says he basically needs funding. He wants to become the first disabled racer to race in the Indianapolis 500. Now, Robert Wickens has not raced in IndyCar since 2018 after that very, very scary crash at Pocono. And it was just a very, very vicious and one of the worst accidents we've ever seen in IndyCar series history. Now, Robert Wickens obviously has been on the road to recovery for the last 5 or 6 years. And we've seen him racing with Brian Herta's team. And obviously now the question is, if he was to run the Indy 500, he obviously number one needs the funding. And I think that someone would definitely want to work with Robert Wickens. Now, the big other question is going to come into play. What team could he drive for? Now, Brian Herta, I don't think owns any stake in any of the organizations anymore since he is the strategist for Kyle Kirkwood now going forward. But what if Brian Herta decided to step away as a strategist from Kyle Kirkwood for one race, have someone else like a Brian Barnhart switch back over to the 27 car for Kyle Kirkwood? And what if Brian Herta got that back so that we could see Robert Wickens drive for Andretti? That would be epic and would be really, really awesome. The question is it going to end up happening? I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you. I'm not sure if that will happen. But I think it would be really cool nonetheless to see Robert Wickens make a return to IndyCar and run the Indy 500. Because if that ends up happening, I'm probably going to get a little emotional because I miss seeing Robert Wickens out on the racetrack. I think it'd be really, really good for the sport if Robert Wickens is able to make a comeback and a return. So I hope it ends up happening. It'd be really, really good for the sport. And we'll see if it ends up happening. But I really hope that it can happen, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson and Ross Chastain. Now, we're going to talk about these guys in just a little bit, but we got to go back to one of the late race restarts. So there have been a lot of questions about one of the late race restarts where it looked like that Ross Chastain jumped the restart. This is a restart where the Martin Truex Jr. crash ended up happening, where a lot of cars end up getting a ton of damage. And a lot of people ask, why did Ross Chastain not get penalized for jumping the restart? Well, according to Brad Moran, who does a lot of the officiating in NASCAR, he says that the data shows that Larson actually was the first one to the gas, and Chastain did not jump the restart. Now, obviously, a lot of fans like myself are really questioning what Brad Moran is saying. And the reason we're questioning it is because of the fact that he didn't even show the data to us that the 5 got into the gas pedal first. And if I'm not mistaken, it shouldn't be the person who gets to the gas first. It should be the person who comes across the line first. Because if you come across that restart box and you're not the leader of the race, which Chastain at the time was not the leader of the race, Ross Chastain should not have been the leader. I don't care if the Larson got to the gas first, and even if he spun the tires. If he got to the gas first, he should have been the first one across that line. And normally, you're supposed to be the leader. It's supposed to be the first person across that restart box. The fact that NASCAR did not penalize Ross Chastain for this, or even told him he should have gone back to second, is a little mind-boggling to me. The fact that Chastain completely got away with it, and you got Brad Moran, who made some pretty questionable calls, especially with, I think he was the one who designed the whole situation with how the running order got completely screwed up and jacked up right there, where Bubba Walsh should have had all the wreck cars, and he wasn't have all the wreck cars. He could have had a shot to be William Byron in that race, if not for that. But still, I just find it frustrating that Brad Moran is basically saying that he did nothing wrong, and yet he completely did jump the restart. If you actually look at the restart, that he jumped it. I don't know why they weren't. I don't know what's so hard to understand it, what concept to understand, what world Brad Moran's living on, but overall, kind of frustrating to see this. I understand what he's saying, but again, I think he completely jumped the restart, but that's just my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Darlington TV ratings from this past weekend. So every single week we have TV ratings that come out. And according to Adam Stern, FS1 got a 1.43 rating and 2.689 billion viewers for the Goodyear 400 on Sunday. That is up from a 1.45 rating, a little bit down in the rating side of things, but it's up from a 2.614 million viewers in 2022. That is now the 5th straight race that we've seen an increase in the viewership in NASCAR, which is absolutely huge. I think it's really good to see the TV ratings have gone up because I've wondered if ratings were going to continue to increase. And this is probably about a 3 or 4% increase, at least in the viewership side of things. And this is really, really good for the sport long term, especially with TV negotiations going on. You want the TV ratings to be up. After the beginning of the year, we've had a lot of TV ratings go down, and I thought the Chase Elliott effect was definitely a really big factor. But I don't think it's just Chase Elliott being a reason why we're seeing more people show up. You've obviously got Ross Chastain, who's been in the headlines. And whether you like Ross Chastain or not, he's created a lot of headlines. I think a lot of people were interested, especially after seeing that the Ross Chastain fight got all over social media and got all over ESPN. I think a lot of people are really interested to see the race, see if Ross Chastain was going to do something else. And he definitely did something else, all right. He had definitely caused more problems out on the racetrack for sure. But it was very interesting to see this, and I'm very happy nonetheless to see that the TV ratings are continuing to go up, because the more the TV ratings go up, the better it's going to be with the negotiations, especially with the fact that negotiations have not been going good, especially as of recently. You want to see these TV ratings go up, and I'm definitely really happy nonetheless to see the TV ratings are once again going up. I think this is really, really positive, and I think this could definitely help the future when it comes to the TV deal going forward, but we're going to have to wait and see what happens if things do continue to go any better direction. Nonetheless, so glad to see that the TV ratings are up. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Larson and Ross Chastain once again. Now, the Couch Racer Shop, which is basically an account that's run by the Dirty Mo Media Group from the Door Bumper Clear podcast, they put out an interesting tweet. And they basically said, why was basically Kyle Larson's picker not in victory lane? Well, according to the Couch Racer Shop, the 10 Xfinity crew that's in the Xfinity series that Carl Grayson uses is also the #1 Cup crew for Trackhouse Racing, which obviously is Ross Chastain's pit crew. Larson apparently had given the team a hand gesture after the incident at Dover when Ross Chastain ran the back of Brendan Poole and Kyle Larson was collected. So they boycotted going to victory lane at Darlington Raceway. Obviously, this shows that that team is really committed to staying with Ross Chastain and are really loyal to them. And obviously, Kyle Larson, at that situation at Dover, they had every right to be frustrated with it, because Kyle Larson quintessentially got wrecked by Ross Chastain for no reason. Ross Chastain was way in over his head and way too aggressive right there and caused a massive incident and made a huge mistake and had really no repercussions from the incident right there. And it was just really frustrating to watch as a fan to see that end up happening. And I cannot blame them for being upset. Again, I understand being loyal to your driver. I get, but again, this is only the second time now you've gone to victory lane. And of course, it's been with your Cup guys. You want to relish and take those opportunities. Obviously, if Ross Chastain starts winning in the Cup Series, that will happen where they'll be able to go to victory lane a lot more consistently. That being said, though, it's kind of interesting to see there's still a little beef going on right there. I can't blame Kyle Larson for giving a hand gesture, because he got completely screwed and completely ran over at Dover. Basically got his car destroyed because Ross Chastain was way over his head and was way too aggressive. It's definitely a little surprising to see this. Normally you don't see pickers basically boycott going to victory lane. Again, the Couch Racer Stop, they're affiliated with the Dirty Mo Media, so we'd have to see if Chris Rice did confirm this or not, but it wouldn't surprise or shock me at this point, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, Bob Pockrass was in a call, and a Zoom call, and a media call with Kyle Busch. And he had asked Kyle Busch if he's still planning to run the Indy 500 in the future. Well, Kyle Busch confirmed to the media that he says he has stopped making calls to run the Indianapolis 500. He said that the ride that he was supposed to run is a ride that Kyle Larson is going to run. And he believes that it doesn't think it's ever going to happen. He would love to run Indy 500, but he says at this point, with the opportunities drying up over the last couple of years, he feels like he's never going to get a shot and opportunity to run the Indianapolis 500. That is extremely disappointing, because I think if you're a team, bringing Kyle Busch in will be really, really huge for IndyCar, especially for next year. Because, of course, Kyle Larson is going to be with Aaron McLaren for 2 years. He found out it's a 2-year contract for 2024 and 2025. If I was a team owner in IndyCar, like a Dry Ryan Bull Racing or Chevy organization, I would definitely want to see Kyle Busch run the Indianapolis 500. It would be really cool to see, in my opinion, the two most talented drivers in the NASCAR Cup Series, Kyle Busch and Kyle Larson, compete against each other. Because we know that Kyle Busch has been trying to run the Indianapolis 500 for the last couple of years. And he came close to running the Indy 500 about 6 or 7 years ago. We obviously know that he got denied from Joe Gibbs. But now than being a Chevy driver, he now has some more potential opportunities to maybe go racing in the Indianapolis 500. But like he said, it sounds like at this point that the chance of him running the Indy 500 are drying up. And Kyle Busch is definitely getting a little bit older in age. Kyle Busch is technically going to be 38 years old, and he's getting a little bit older. And with him not getting the opportunity to run Indy 500 for the next couple of years, at least till 2025, unless the team can pick him up, it just, to me, is really disappointing news that he's not going to probably ever run the Indianapolis 500. And that's going to be such a potential missed opportunity from a lot of these teams. So if I'm an organization right now and I see this video of Kyle Busch saying that he doesn't think he's going to have a shot and opportunity of running Indy 500, if I'm a team owner, I'm looking at this, I'm saying, hey, you know what? we need to try to find a way to bring Kyle Busch in our organization. And there's a lot of organizations that definitely would love to run Kyle Busch in the Indianapolis 500. So I really hope in the future he gets to run the Indy 500. It is disappointing news to hear that he's not probably going to run the Indy 500 ever, and it's a shame. I know there's a lot of time. There's still plenty of time, but time is running out quickly, and I think the chances are definitely getting a little bit more slim. It is disappointing nonetheless here that he's likely not going to run the Indy 500. In the future, I want to see him do it. I really wish it was with Team Penske. Team Penske definitely could have some rides open, but Team Penske obviously is limiting how many cars that they're going to run. Obviously, they would have liked to have Kyle Larson initially, but I really would love in the future, nonetheless, see Kyle Busch run the Indy 500 before he ends up retiring from racing altogether. I hope he gets an opportunity to do it, and nonetheless, I really sucks he's likely not going to run it. Hopefully, though, he does change his mind and decides to run it, but a team, of course, does have to pick him up for him to have the opportunity and a shot to run the Indianapolis 500. I hope things change, but to be honest, I'm not sure if they're going to change, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of three major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Kurt Busch. Now, we kind of talk about Kurt Busch a little bit on this channel. But Kurt Busch over the weekend, of course, at Darlington Raceway, when him and Ricky Craven were speaking to media about the 20th year anniversary of the greatest finish in NASCAR history. And Kurt Busch gave an update on potential return in 2023. He says he's feeling much better. He says the improvements our trade he's made have been tremendous. He is pushing for a return. Obviously, he says there's still a little bit of issues kind of getting back. There's fatigue, and that's the biggest thing that's hurting him from potentially returning. But he says he's pushing to make a return to NASCAR in 2023. Kurt Busch, of course, has not raced in the NASCAR Cup Series since 2022 when he was qualifying at Pocono to make it in, I believe it was in the final round of qualifying, I believe in the Group B or Group A session, backed it into the outside wall and suffered a concussion. And he would announce at the Las Vegas weekend that he would be retiring from full-time racing, but not retiring altogether, and that Tyler Reddick would be taking over. And Kurt Busch has been trying to push to get back into the Cup Series. He obviously said, basically when they were promoting the Chicago Street Course event not too long ago, he said that 2311 Racing does have a third car ready for him when he's ready to go. And Kurt Busch obviously wants to get back behind the wheel of a NASCAR Cup Series car. I think a lot of his fans will agree. We do miss Kurt Busch. Kurt Busch has not been a Cup Series car for almost a year, and Kurt Busch always makes the sport much better. He's done a really good job commentating races for Fox. I think he's done a really good job on that aspect and that part. But I think many of us do miss seeing Kurt Busch behind the wheel. But obviously, we want to see Kurt Busch get better before he does get back behind the wheel of a NASCAR Cup Series car because his health is the most important thing. But now the question is going to be, when will Kurt Busch return to the NASCAR Cup Series? Well, there are potentially a couple potential races that he can return. The first potential possibility is the Chicago Street Course. We know that Kurt Busch has been helping a lot with promotion for the Chicago Street Course event, so that could be a potential return place there. Plus, it really is the home base of Michael Jordan 2311 Racing, and they, like I said, they do have a third car there, and we're about a month and a half away from that, so that could be a potential returning spot for Kurt Busch. Other track that Kurt Busch could maybe run is maybe for the Southern 500. Obviously, Kurt Busch has publicly said that he wants to return and would love to run at Darlington and win at Darlington. Kurt Busch has never won the Southern 500 or ever won at Darlington in his NASCAR Cup Series career, or been NASCAR really in general in any series. So I think he would love to win at Darlington before he would officially retire. And then, of course, there's other potential possibly racing at Las Vegas in the fall. Las Vegas is Kurt Busch's home track, and Kurt Busch has won there once or twice in his NASCAR Cup Series career. So he definitely would love to go there and win at that racetrack at Las Vegas. So now the question is going to be for me, does Kurt Busch return to the NASCAR Cup Series? Yes, I think he will return in 2023. I think we're getting closer and closer to a potential return. The question is when he returns, we'll have to wait and see. But nonetheless, this is a positive direction when it comes to that. But you look at what Kurt Busch has done for 2311 Racing, how much of an asset he has been to 2311 Racing and making the organization much, much better. He's helped Bubba Wallace out tremendously, and Bubba Wallace right now is really on the best stretch of his NASCAR Cup Series career right now in the middle portion of the stretch. Yes, he's not won a race, but Bubba Wallace has been finishing the top 12 in 5 of the last 6 races. Only outlier really is that Talladega race where he crashed out, and he was up front contending for the win there. And I think Bubba Wallace could be a threat in the North Wilkesboro race this week, and he's been really strong. He's had the pace. And then you look at Tyler Reddick. Yes, Tyler Reddick got hit by a penalty yesterday, but Reddick has been generally performing a lot better and more up front consistently. So I think Kurt Busch has been a huge asset to 2311 Racing and been a really big part in helping 2311 Racing become a much faster and a much better organization. So I really hope Kurt Busch comes back soon, but I hope he continues to go through the right steps to get back behind the wheel. Nonetheless, though, it sounds like he's wanting to get back really, really soon and get back behind the wheel of a NASCAR Cup Series car in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Ross Chastain once again. Now, Ross Chastain over the last couple days has been in the media, and we've seen a lot of team owners and a couple team owners have kind of called out Ross Chastain. The first one being Rick Hendrick. So let's go back to Sunday afternoon. So in the late stages of the race, on a restart with about 9 laps to go in the NASCAR Cup Series race at Darlington Raceway, we saw that Kyle Larson and Ross Chastain were kind of getting into it. On one of the earlier restarts, about 80 or 90 laps ago, Ross Chastain forced Kyle Larson into the outside wall, and Kyle Larson lost 3 or 4 positions because of that. Then, with about 13 to go on that restart, we saw Kyle Larson kind of force Ross Chastain in the outside wall. Then Ross Chastain asked and told Trackhouse, "Are we even?" And basically, Ross Chastain goes into turn number 1 and ends up wrecking himself and Kyle Larson. Obviously, Kyle Larson calls Ross Chastain a hack, and Cliff Daniels was very frustrated, saying, "Hey, Chevrolet, that's 3 times now that we've been wrecked by Ross Chastain." After the NASCAR Cup Series race, we saw Ross Chastain also respond, saying that I basically went up there to basically block him and stuff, but I didn't mean to wreck myself. Then Rick Hendrick spoke to the media. And usually you don't see Rick Hendrick call out or bash out drivers. He hasn't really done that since the time when Jeff Bodine got wrecked by Dale Earnhardt in 1987 or 1988. Well, Rick Hendrick was very unhappy. He says that Ross Chastain does not need to be that aggressive. You can be aggressive at times, but he does not need to be that aggressive in that situation. He says, "I don't care if he drives for Chevrolet. I don't care. You're going to start breaking my guys, or we're going to put out the order to basically come after you." Well, yesterday, also on Monday evening, Justin Marks went on SiriusXM NASCAR radio, and he says things do need to be cleaned up for Ross Chastain, basically reiterating and saying that things absolutely do need to be cleaned up on his part, and that we need to see him completely change and basically he needs to calm down a little bit. He says, "I'm going to be there a little more hands-on for Ross Chastain and work with him just a little bit more." So that's been the fallout of the Ross Chastain situation. Let's go back to the Rick Hendrick comments. I saw a lot of people on social media talking about this when it comes to the Rick Hendrick comments. Rick Hendrick, normally, he does not get mad. Like I said, the last time he got frustrated and pissed off at a driver is Dale Earnhardt back in the late 1980s. And basically, he's kind of not wrong here. Ross Chastain has ruffled a lot of feathers, and he has wrecked a lot of times a lot of the Hendrick cars. You look at the last 4 weeks. Ross Chastain has affected Kyle Larson in 3 of the last 4 races. Talladega, Ross Chastain and Noah Gragson get into it. Ross Chastain's not going to let it fall. But the actions of Ross Chastain cost Kyle Larson to have that massive accident where he got T-boned by Ryan Preece. Then at Dover the next week, Ross Chastain being way too aggressive in stage 1 of the race on lap 80 of the race, sends it into Brennan Poole. Brennan Poole goes back in the outside wall, and Kyle Larson gets completely collected. Now, Larson's able to continue on, but ends up finishing like 20 or 30 laps down in the race. Then you go to this past weekend at Darlington, where they had a little bit of beef going on there, and then, of course, you saw Ross Chastain run into Kyle Larson. And that's why Rick Hendrick's frustrated and pissed. And when you have Rick Hendrick upset, because remember, he has a lot of influence in this garage. And if you make Rick Hendrick mad, that's not a good thing. And you don't want to make Rick Hendrick upset. So I don't blame Rick Hendrick for being upset and angry there. Yes, you're going for the win, but you can't be over-aggressive and make careless mistakes like Ross Chastain is making. And then let's go to Justin Marks' comments. Obviously, Justin Marks, a different tone and change. Usually, Justin Marks is backing his driver and defending his driver on a consistent basis. Normally, you don't see Justin Marks changing his tone. But I think Justin Marks, there's a couple things that need to be known. Number one, I think a lot of people think that we want to see Ross Chastain completely tone the aggression out altogether. Not necessarily. But the careless mistakes on the racetrack are a big problem. And I think that's one of the things that's hurting their team is the fact that Ross Chastain is consistently making careless mistake after careless mistake and taking him out of race winning contention on a week-by-week basis by some of the actions that Ross Chastain is pulling. Ross Chastain had one of the fastest cars at Darlington and easily could have won. It could have been a great redemption story after what happened at Kansas. It could have been an incredible redemption story. But instead, Ross Chastain chose to get into it with Kyle Larson and choose basically getting into Kyle Larson instead of focusing on the bigger picture and trying to go for the victory. Ross Chastain needs to focus on the bigger picture of winning races. Trackhouse is coming up on nearly not winning a race in a year. The last time they won was Sonoma with Daniel Suarez. Ross Chastain himself has not won since Talladega in the spring of 2022. And Ross Chastain has had so many opportunities and shots of winning races. But he's got into petty arguments and fights with drivers and has gotten into petty situations where he's raced way too aggressive and way too hard. And he's going to have to clean it up just a little bit. And I think Ross will just clean it up. And Ross, I don't want to see him completely get rid of the aggressiveness, but the careless mistakes on the racetrack, they've got to go away. If Ross Chastain's going to win a championship in NASCAR, he's just got to stop being careless. It's just that plain and simple. I don't want to see him completely change altogether, but you got to calm down the careless mistakes on the racetrack if you're going to have a shot at winning the championship, because he may not win the championship now, even if he calms it down. So he's got to calm down on the careless mistakes and stop making mistakes out on the racetrack. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Carl Edwards. Now, I've talked about Carl Edwards a couple times on this channel, especially as of recently, but it really comes in sense from what happened a couple days ago. So Carl Edwards, for the first time in almost 6 or 7 years, made a return to the spotlight. And during Stage 2 and jumping on the FS1 broadcast on Stage 2, Carl Edwards basically came on FS1 broadcast, and he's not ruling out a potential return to NASCAR. He says it's getting harder and harder to not race in NASCAR. He plans to go and do sim work, and he says, I love racing cars. And if he wants to return, he says he wants to do it at 100%. Now, obviously, this is now the second time that Carl Edwards has kind of been in the media spotlight because, of course, he was honored as one of the 75 greatest NASCAR drivers of all time. And by the way, he did a fantastic and incredible job up in EFS1 booth. And if one of the networks like FS1 or NBC want to pick him up to do broadcasting, trust me, I think a lot of fans would agree he should definitely jump up there and do broadcasting stuff. Now, this is really interesting because Carl Edwards, this is the first time really since his retirement that Carl Edwards has kind of stated that he's kind of interested in making a return to NASCAR. Now, the question is, where could Carl Edwards return and race? Well, I think there's a couple of potential options and possibilities in the racing side of things. The first one and the most likely would be Trackhouse Racing. Obviously, Justin Marks actually had approached Carl Edwards and basically him driving for Trackhouse Racing a few years ago, but Carl Edwards said no at the time. And that's why he went with Daniel Suarez. He chose the 99 number for Trackhouse Racing because Justin Marks was a Carl Edwards Racing fan. And Carl Edwards, like I said, wants to go visit the Trackhouse Racing shop. And Trackhouse Racing, of course, is located in the Nashville area. He wants to check it out. Trackhouse Racing, this would be a huge asset. And then, of course, you think about the fact that they do have the Project 91 option and car that's available right there. Now, usually, the Project 91 car is reserved for international drivers. However, I think he make an exception because Justin Marks had said that he was almost willing to put Jimmy Johnson in the Project 91 car before Jimmy Johnson decided to go ahead and work with Legacy Motor Club, which, of course, is now going to be a Toyota team in 2023. But I think if you brought Carl Edwards into the Trackhouse Racing group, you would basically have a huge asset for both Ross Chastain and Daniel Suarez, and he could be a huge driver coach in the races that he runs. So that could be an option. The second option could be 2311 Racing. Remember, earlier this year in January, it was rumored that Carl Edwards was almost going to drive that number 67 car. Now, obviously, found out that it would be Travis Pastrana. Eventually, it was Travis Pastrana who would be driving that car. But we all initially thought it was Carl Edwards who was going to be driver of that car. Carl Edwards driver 2311 Racing could be really huge for the 2311 Racing organization. He could go there and help out drivers, I don't know, basically like Bubba Wallace and Tyler Reddick, and could be another driver coach that could come into play and drive for that team. So that could be another potential possibility for Carl Edwards there. The third team could be Junior Motorsports. Now, Junior Motorsports, obviously, they want to make a jump up to the NASCAR Cup Series. And we know that they're trying to get a charter. If they were to start a team up in the NASCAR Cup Series, Carl Edwards could be a really good driver to go with. Now, there's other drivers that they could obviously go with, like a Kyle Weatherman, perhaps, like a Matt DiBenedetto, perhaps, as another driver they could go with, or maybe bring their drivers up from the Xfinity Series. Not going to be Josh Riggs, likely going to SHR and basically being there with other drivers in the SHR camp. in the 4 camp getting basically huge upgrades will be there, and Josh could be a really huge coach for Haley Deegan, among other drivers in the 4 camp. But still, I think Junior Motorsports bringing Carl Edwards in would be really, really huge. Now, the big question comes into play, will Carl Edwards come back to NASCAR? I think it's actually becoming very, very likely that Carl Edwards is going to come back. The fact he's been speaking more and more to the media that he really is interested. It's getting harder and harder for him to not return to NASCAR. Tells me that I think that there is actually a really strong shot of him returning. Now, where do I think he likely ends up? I think he's going to end up driving for Trackhouse Racing if he returns. Obviously, that's the team we've heard him mention multiple different times. And then again, there's that Project 91 car and that opportunity right there for him to come back. So I think he will return to NASCAR, and I think he'll drive for Trackhouse Racing. But if he does return behind the wheel, I think if he went up in the broadcast booth for NBC next year, that would be huge. Imagine having Rick Allen, Dale Jr., and Carl Edwards, maybe Jeff Burton in the booth. Carl Edwards provides a lot of great analysis. He did a fantastic job in the booth, and I think it'd be really fun to have Carl Edwards doing some commentaries once again. So going back to the discussion, if he comes back, I think he's going to return. I think he returns to the Cup Series, and I think it'll be really huge for the sport if Carl Edwards does make official return. Hopefully, he does return to NASCAR. So, that is going to be it for today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe to the channel, notifications on so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links go below over that, and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. Do you think Carl Edwards returns to NASCAR or not? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What are your thoughts about Rick Hendrick's comments calling out Ross Chastain? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later today on the channel, there should be a video discussing Alex Bowman if he's going to return or not. Then tomorrow on the channel, we're going to have race picks for the All-Star race. Friday, there'll be a NASCAR news video on the channel. And then Saturday, of course, there'll be the Truck Series race review from North Wilkesboro. We got a lot of other content on the way as well. Sunday, of course, the All-Star race. Just a lot of awesome content on the way. And we've had a lot of support on the channel. We were trying to get to 2,500 subscribers by the end of the year. So if you enjoyed today's video, make sure you subscribe. I truly appreciate if you enjoyed it. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.